My daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eyes and said, "We think it would be better if you didn't join us this year, Eleanor. The house will be too crowded, and frankly, your old stories bore everyone." Those words stung like winter frost. But they awakened something in me I thought had long disappeared. My spirit. That painful rejection became the catalyst for the most joyful holiday gathering I'd experienced in decades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. They say that family is who you're born to, but sometimes family is who you choose. This is the story of how I reclaimed my holiday, my dignity, and discovered that at 70 years old, I wasn't just someone's mother, grandmother, or widow. I was Eleanor Martin, and I still had so much to give. For 43 years, I hosted Thanksgiving dinner in my home on Maple Avenue. Even after Harold passed away 6 years ago, I maintained our traditions. The antique dining table that belonged to my grandmother would groan under the weight of turkey, cranberry sauce, and my famous apple sage stuffing. The china Harold and I received as wedding gifts would be polished to a gleam, and everyone would gather. My son Michael, his wife Diane, their children, my sister Barbara and her family, cousins from Harold's side, and a few neighbors who had nowhere else to go. I was the matriarch, the keeper of traditions, the one who remembered everyone's favorite dishes and made sure the gravy never had lumps. Michael would always carve the turkey, just like his father taught him. The grandchildren would fight over who got to light the candles. My sister Barbara would bring her pecan pie, and we'd laugh about how she almost burned down her kitchen the first time she tried to make it. But things began to change 3 years ago when Michael got his promotion at the investment firm. Suddenly, they moved to Westlake Estates, one of those gated communities with fountains and security guards. Diane redecorated their new home in what she called modern minimalist style. Gone were the family heirlooms and comfortable furniture, replaced by stark white sofas and abstract art that looked to me like someone had spilled paint and called it a masterpiece. The first Thanksgiving after they moved, Diane suggested they host. "Your house is getting a bit small for everyone, Eleanor," she said, though my home had comfortably held our family for decades. I didn't argue. Change is part of life, I told myself. But when I arrived with my apple sage stuffing and Harold's carving set that had been in his family for generations, Diane intercepted me at the door. "Oh, we're not doing traditional Thanksgiving food this year," she announced. "Our caterer has prepared a Mediterranean-inspired menu, and we've hired a professional carver. Those old knives aren't really sanitary, are they?" I watched as my grandchildren ate olives and something called deconstructed turkey roulade, instead of the comfort food they'd grown up with. No one fought over lighting candles because there weren't any, just those flameless LED things that Diane said were safer. When I tried to tell my favorite story about how Harold once fought a snowstorm to get home for Thanksgiving, my grandson Jason whispered, "Mom says we've heard Grandma's stories 1,000,000 times." Last year was a little better. I was allowed to bring my stuffing, though Diane placed it on a side table rather than the main spread. Michael seemed distracted, barely speaking to anyone, constantly checking his phone. The grandchildren were glued to their devices, and when I asked about school, they gave one-word answers before returning to their screens. Eleanor looks out her kitchen window, expression thoughtful. Still, nothing prepared me for that phone. Call 3 weeks before this year's Thanksgiving. I was planning which ingredients to buy, fresh versus dried herbs, whether to try a heritage turkey this year, when my phone rang. "Mom, it's me," Michael said, his voice oddly formal. "Diane wants to talk to you about Thanksgiving." There was a shuffle, and then Diane's crisp voice came through. "Eleanor, we've been thinking about the holiday arrangements. The thing is, we're hosting some of Michael's colleagues from work, people who could really help his career. We need to make a good impression." "I understand, dear," I said. "Should I wear something special?" I have that blue dress from Barbara's daughter's wedding. Actually, Diane cut in, we think it would be better if you didn't join us this year, Eleanor. The house will be too crowded, and frankly, your old stories bore everyone. She paused, then added with false brightness, maybe you could have a nice quiet day at home. Watch the parade on TV? The silence stretched between us. I wanted to protest, to remind her that these holidays weren't just gatherings, but the threads that held our family's tapestry together. Instead, I heard myself say, I see. Well, you do what you think is best. Wonderful, Diane said, sounding relieved. I knew you'd understand. Oh, and the children will be quite busy with school activities, so maybe hold off on calling them for a bit. They're under so much pressure these days. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, watching the afternoon light fade to dusk. The house that had once bustled with life and laughter felt suddenly empty, hollow. Was this what the rest of my days would be? Quiet afternoons blending into silent evenings, waiting for phone calls that never came, gradually being erased from my own family's story? That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my living room until dawn, looking at the photographs that chronicled my life. Harold and I on our wedding day, Michael taking his first steps, family vacations, graduations, celebrations, a lifetime of love and sacrifice and joy. And now, at 70, I was being told I was no longer needed, no longer wanted. But as the first light of dawn crept through my curtains, something shifted inside me. A quiet voice that sounded remarkably like Harold's whispered, in my heart, Ellie, you've never been one to give up. Don't start now. I was born Eleanor Jean Campbell in the spring of 1953 in a small town called Millfield that most people have never heard of. My father owned the local hardware store, and my mother taught piano lessons from our front parlor. We weren't rich, by any measure, but we had what mattered, a home filled with music and laughter, hands that were never too busy to hold, and a table that always had room for one more. Eleanor, my mother used to say, the secret to a happy life is 3 things: work that fulfills you, love that sustains you, and a perfectly flaky pie crust. She'd laugh then, flour dusting her cheeks, but there was wisdom in her humor. I learned early that nurturing others was its own kind of strength. That creating spaces where people felt welcomed and valued was an art form as legitimate as any painting hanging in a museum. I met Harold Martin during my second year at community college. I was studying to be a teacher, and he was working on his business degree. We bumped into each other, quite literally, at the campus library. I was carrying a stack of books on early childhood education that towered above my line of sight, and Harold was rushing to return a business text before the library closed. The collision sent books flying across the polished floor, and as we scrambled to gather them, our hands touched over a copy of Economic Principles and Practices. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice soft despite his imposing height. His eyes were kind, deep brown with tiny flecks of gold, and when he smiled, a small dimple appeared in his left cheek. I'm Harold. Eleanor, I replied, feeling suddenly shy. But everyone calls me Ellie. That chance meeting blossomed into coffees at the campus cafe, long walks through the autumn leaves, and eventually, a diamond ring that Harold saved for 6 months to afford. It's not very big, he apologized as he slipped it onto my finger. But one day, I promise you'll have everything you deserve. I looked into those earnest eyes and knew with absolute certainty that I already had everything I could ever want. We married in the summer of 1974 in my parents' backyard. My mother strung fairy lights through the old oak tree, and my father built an arch of twisted branches where we exchanged our vows. My wedding dress was simple cotton lace that my grandmother had worn at her own wedding, carefully altered to fit my smaller frame. Harold wore a navy suit he'd bought for job interviews, a sprig of baby's breath in his lapel. We started our life together in a small apartment near the community college where I had taken a job as an administrative assistant while finishing my teaching degree. Harold worked at a local bank, putting in extra hours whenever he could. Our furniture was mostly secondhand: a wobbly dining table my father had repaired, a sofa with slightly worn armrests from Harold's aunt, mismatched chairs we'd painted, the same shade of blue to create some semblance of cohesion. Those early years were lean but sweet. We saved our pennies, cooking simple meals at home and finding joy in free pleasures: walks in the park, board games by candlelight when the electricity bill loomed large, picnics by the river on Sunday afternoons. When others our age were buying new cars or taking vacations, we put every extra dollar into our dream: a home of our own where we could raise a family. In 1977, we welcomed Michael into the world. I still remember the weight of him in my arms, so impossibly tiny yet somehow containing the entire universe. Harold stood beside the hospital bed, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Look, what we made, Ellie," he whispered, voice choked with emotion. "Look at our son." Michael had Harold's dark eyes and my stubborn chin. From his earliest days, he showed a determination that both delighted and exhausted us. When he learned to walk, he refused any helping hand, tumbling again and again onto our carpeted floor, only to push himself up with renewed resolve. When he learned to read, he insisted on finishing entire books in one sitting, even as his small eyes grew heavy with sleep. "He's going to be something special," Harold would say proudly, watching Michael build elaborate structures with his wooden blocks or carefully count the change in his small piggy bank. "Our boy is going places." By the time Michael started school, Harold's career at the bank had advanced enough for us to make a down payment on a modest house on Maple Avenue. It wasn't grand: 3 bedrooms, a slightly outdated kitchen, a backyard that flooded after heavy rains, but to us, it was a palace. I planted rose bushes along the front walkway and hung curtains I'd sewn myself in every window. Harold spent weekends repairing floorboards and painting walls, whistling as he worked. We filled that house with love, with plans, with the noise and chaos and joy of family life. I eventually secured a position teaching 2nd grade at Oakwood Elementary, just a few blocks from our home. The salary wasn't impressive, but the hours meant I could be home when Michael returned from school, and the summer breaks allowed us precious time together as a family. Harold continued climbing the ranks at the bank, moving from teller to loan officer to assistant manager. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. We had health insurance, a reliable car, and enough extra to start a college fund for Michael. Every summer, we took a modest vacation, a week at a lakeside cabin, camping in the state park, once even a trip to Disney World that we'd saved 3 years to afford. Michael would bounce with excitement for weeks beforehand, helping to pack the car and plotting our route on the road atlas with a highlighter. As Michael grew, I watched with a mixture of pride and wistfulness as he developed his own identity, separate from ours. The little boy who once followed Harold around the yard, mimicking his every move, became a teenager with opinions and interests all his own. He joined the debate team in high school, discovered a passion for economics, and set his sights on colleges with prestigious business programs. Just like his father, I'd say to Harold, watching Michael pore over finance textbooks at the kitchen table. Harold would shake his head, smiling. "Smarter, though, and more ambitious. He won't stop at assistant manager of a small-town bank." There was no bitterness in Harold's voice when he said this. Only pride and a deep, abiding hope that his son would have opportunities he never did. Harold had given up his own dreams of further education to support his younger siblings after his father's early death. He never spoke of it as a sacrifice, but I knew it was one of his few regrets. When Michael was accepted to Westmore University, with a partial scholarship, Harold and I hugged each other and cried after Michael went to bed. The scholarship would help, but we still faced 4 years of tuition payments that would strain our resources to the breaking point. Without hesitation, Harold took a second job working weekend security at the mall. I started tutoring after school, and selling homemade preserves at the farmer's market. "We'll manage," Harold assured me when I fretted over our thinning savings. "This is what we've been working for all these years." And we did manage, though it meant postponing home repairs, cutting back on everything non-essential, and working more hours than our bodies sometimes wanted to give. The day we drove Michael to college, helping him unpack his things in a dormitory room that seemed impossibly small for our tall, gangly son, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, pride and fear and loss and hope all tangled together in my heart. "Call us anytime," I told him, straightening his bedspread for the third time. "Day or night, and come home whenever you can." "I will, Mom," he promised, though I could see his eyes were already looking beyond us, toward the new life waiting. Just outside the door, Harold squeezed my hand as we walked back to the car. "He'll be fine, Ellie. We raised him right." Michael thrived at Westmore. His business acumen and natural charisma opened doors to internships, leadership positions in campus organizations, and a circle of friends from wealthy, well-connected families. When he came home for holidays, he spoke a new language of stock portfolios and market trends, startups and venture capital. His clothes became more expensive, his tastes more refined, his stories filled with names and places that seemed to belong to a world I could barely imagine. It was during his senior year that he brought Diane home for Thanksgiving. She was striking, tall, and slender with sleek blonde hair and clothes that looked like they belonged in a magazine. She studied international business and spoke 3 languages. Her father was a corporate attorney in Chicago, her mother a dermatologist with her own practice. Next to her, I felt suddenly conscious of my sensible shoes and the laugh lines around my eyes. "Your home is so quaint," she said, looking around our living room with its comfortable but worn furniture, the family photos on every surface, the hand-crocheted afghan draped over the sofa. "It's like stepping into another time." I wasn't sure if it was a compliment, but I chose to take it as one. "Harold and I believe a home should be lived in, not just looked at," I replied, offering her more mashed potatoes. "Diane's family just renovated their lake house," Michael said quickly. "It was featured in Architectural Digest." "How lovely," I said, though I'd never heard of the magazine. "I'd love to see photos sometime." Throughout the meal, I watched my son, the way he looked at Diane, the way he seemed to hang on her every word, the way he subtly corrected his grammar and table manners in her presence. It wasn't that I disliked her. She was polite, intelligent, clearly ambitious, but I couldn't help feeling that when Michael looked at her, he saw a future that had no place for his past. After they left, Harold found me in the kitchen, washing dishes with more vigor than necessary. "She seems nice," he offered, picking up a dish towel. "She's perfect," I said, scrubbing at a stubborn spot on the roasting pan. "Beautiful, educated, sophisticated, everything I'm not." Harold set down the towel and turned me to face him, his hands gentle on my shoulders. "Ellie, Martin, you stop that right now. You are the most beautiful, intelligent, loving woman I've ever known. If our son is lucky, Diane will have half your character." I leaned into his solid warmth, grateful beyond words for this man who had stood beside me for so many years, who still looked at me as if I were the young girl he'd met in the library, even as time etched its marks on both our faces. Michael and Diane married 2 years later in a lavish ceremony at a historic mansion that Diane's parents rented for the occasion. The guest list included partners from Michael's investment firm, Diane's sorority sisters, and various connections from both their professional networks. Harold and I sat in the front row, feeling somewhat out of place amid the designer suits and cocktail dresses. "Just smile and be yourself," Harold whispered, adjusting his tie for the dozenth time. "We're the parents of the groom. We have every right to be here." The ceremony was beautiful, but impersonal, with none of the warmth or character that had marked our backyard wedding all those years ago. I missed the personal touches, the sense of family and community. But Michael looked happy, And in the end, that was all that mattered. As the years passed, Michael and Diane built their life together, climbing steadily upward in both their careers. They bought a sleek condominium in the downtown area, then upgraded to a larger home in an exclusive neighborhood when Michael received a significant promotion. They traveled extensively, ski trips to Aspen, anniversaries in Paris, business conferences in Tokyo. I followed their lives with interest and pride, though increasingly from a distance. Our phone calls grew shorter and less frequent. Visits became annual events rather than regular occurrences. When they did come to see us, it was often a brief stopover on the way to somewhere else, conversations punctuated by the chiming of cell phones and glances at watches. "They're busy, Ellie," Harold would remind me when I expressed hurt at a canceled visit or forgotten birthday. "Building careers takes time and focus. Remember how hard we worked at their age?" "We always made time for family," I would counter. But I tried not to dwell on it. After all, wasn't this what we'd wanted for Michael? Success, security, opportunities beyond what we could have provided? In 2015, they welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Sophia. I knitted her a soft yellow blanket and a matching hat, spending hours ensuring every stitch was perfect. When we visited the hospital, Diane looked remarkably composed for someone who had just given birth, her hair arranged artfully on the pillow, a silk robe replacing the standard hospital gown. "Would you like to hold her?" Michael asked, carefully transferring the tiny bundle into my arms. The moment I looked into Sophia's face, so small, so perfect, with Harold's dimple already visible in her cheek, all my accumulated disappointments melted away. Here was a fresh start, a new chapter, a chance to rebuild the connections that had frayed over time. 2 years later, they had a son, Lucas. Our grandchildren became the center of our world. I made photo albums documenting their growth, saved for special gifts, planned outings and activities for when they visited. Harold built a treehouse in our backyard and stocked up on toys and books to keep at our house. For a few golden years, it felt like we had reclaimed something precious. Michael and Diane were too busy with their careers to manage all the demands of parenthood without help, so they welcomed our involvement. I picked up Sophia from preschool 3 days a week. Harold taught Lucas to ride a bike in our driveway. During school breaks, the children would stay with us, filling our home once again with laughter and sticky fingerprints and the wonderful chaos of young lives. Then came the winter of 2019, and with it, the diagnosis that would change everything. Harold had been feeling tired for months, brushing off my concerns with reassurances about work stress and age catching up with him. When he finally agreed to see a doctor, the news was devastating. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer already spread to his liver. The prognosis was 6 months, perhaps a year with aggressive treatment. "It's not fair," I wept in Michael's arms when we called to tell him. "We were supposed to have more time." "We'll get through this, Mom," he promised, his voice steady, though I could hear the fear beneath it. "The firm has excellent medical coverage. We'll find the best specialists, explore every treatment option." True to his word, Michael arranged consultations with top oncologists, researched clinical trials, even investigated experimental treatments overseas. For a few months, I allowed myself to hope. But Harold's decline was swift and merciless. The chemotherapy ravaged his once strong body, leaving him frail and exhausted. The pain medications fogged his sharp mind. Through it all, he remained my Harold, gentle, thoughtful, more concerned with my welfare than his own. "Promise me you'll still find joy, Ellie," he made me swear one night, his hand gripping mine, with surprising strength. "Promise me you won't stop living when I'm gone." I made the promise, though I couldn't imagine how I would keep it. Harold passed away on a quiet Sunday morning in April 2020, with me beside him holding his hand. He slipped away peacefully, the weight of suffering finally lifted from his shoulders. I felt his absence like a physical thing, a hollow space in the bed beside me, an echo in rooms that had once rung with his laughter, a shadow where his substance should have been. The world was already changing then, with the pandemic forcing everyone into isolation. My grief unfolded in a strange limbo, without the usual rituals and gatherings that might have provided some comfort. The funeral was small, socially distanced, nothing like the celebration of life that Harold deserved. Michael flew in for 3 days, staying at a hotel rather than at the house, citing concerns about my age and vulnerability. Diane and the children remained in their gated community, sending flowers and a professionally designed memorial video. Understood the precautions, of course. But understanding didn't ease the loneliness of those first months without Harold. I wandered our house like a ghost, touching his things, wearing his sweaters, sometimes talking to him as if he might answer. The silence that followed my words was deafening. Gradually, painfully, I found ways to keep moving forward. I volunteered to deliver meals to homebound seniors even more isolated than myself. I joined a virtual grief support group where I found comfort in the shared experiences of others who understood the particular ache of losing a lifelong partner. I planted a garden in Harold's memory, filling it with all his favorite flowers: black-eyed Susans, purple coneflowers, bright zinnias, that bloomed from early summer until the first frost. As the world slowly reopened, I established new routines. Tuesday mornings at the community center for watercolor class, Thursday afternoons volunteering at the elementary school's reading program, Sunday dinners with my sister Barbara and her husband, who lived across town. I made new friends, Gloria from my painting class, whose forthright humor reminded me of my mother, Raymond, a retired English professor who shared my love of mystery novels, Louisa and her wife Carmen, who ran the community garden and taught me how to compost properly. The hole in my heart where Harold had been would never completely heal, but I was learning to live around it, to carry my grief as part of me rather than allowing it to consume me. I was keeping my promise to him, one day at a time. Michael and his family remained distant, though we spoke on video calls every few weeks. The children were growing so quickly, developing interests and personalities that I glimpsed only in fragments: Sophia's emerging talent for mathematics, Lucas's obsession with space exploration. I sent birthday gifts and holiday packages, carefully chosen books and handmade items that I hoped would convey the love I couldn't deliver in person. When the invitation came to spend Christmas with them in 2021, I was overjoyed. It would be my first holiday without Harold, and the thought of spending it with family rather than alone was a gift beyond measure. I prepared for weeks, shopping for presents, baking Harold's famous gingerbread cookies from his grandmother's recipe, even buying a new dress for the occasion. The visit was not what I had hoped. Their home, while undeniably beautiful, felt like a showplace rather than a home. The children's toys were confined to a specially designated playroom. The kitchen gleamed with appliances that were never used. They had a private chef prepare most meals, and conversation revolved around investments, property values, and the achievements of people I'd never met. "Grandma, why don't you have a cleaning service?" Sophia asked one afternoon, watching me wash dishes by hand after lunch. "Mom says it's inefficient to do housework yourself when your time could be better spent on personal development." "I find washing dishes rather meditative," I replied, smiling at my granddaughter's serious expression. "And it gives me time to think about nice memories, like when your dad was little and would help me dry the plates." "Dad did chores?" Lucas looked up from his tablet with genuine surprise. "Oh yes," I laughed. "He was my best little helper. He used to stand on a stool right about where you're sitting now." For a moment, a connection flickered between us. A shared image of Michael as a small boy, so different from the polished executive they knew. Then Diane called the children to their scheduled tennis lesson, and the moment dissolved. That evening, as Michael and Diane entertained business associates in their formal dining room, I sat alone in my guest room, missing Harold with an intensity that took my breath away. "I'm trying," I whispered to his memory. "I'm trying to find my place in their world, but I'm not sure there is one." I returned home with a mixture of gratitude and relief. The visit had confirmed what I already suspected. Michael's life had moved in a direction that had little room for the values and traditions that had shaped our family. It wasn't that he didn't love me. It was that he had constructed a narrative of success that required distancing himself from his modest beginnings. In the years that followed, our contact continued to dwindle. Video calls became voice calls, which became text messages and occasional emails. The grandchildren's visits, once highlights of my summer, were replaced by camp sessions and educational travel programs. When I suggested coming to stay with them for a week, there was always some reason it wasn't convenient. Renovations, business trips, the children's packed schedules. I filled my days with meaningful activities and cultivated deeper relationships with friends who had become like family. I took classes at the community college, discovering a talent for ceramics that surprised and delighted me. I traveled a little, a week in New Mexico with Barbara, a guided tour of the Canadian Rockies with my watercolor group, a Caribbean cruise, with Gloria and some other friends from the senior center. It wasn't the life I had imagined for my 70th year, but it was rich and full in its own way. I missed Harold every day, but I also found joy in the independence I'd never expected to have. I painted my bedroom a bold teal color that Harold would have found too dramatic. I adopted a cat from the shelter, despite having always been dog. People during our marriage. I rearranged furniture on a whim and ate ice cream for breakfast occasionally because there was no one to tell me I shouldn't. Still, when holidays approached, the absence of family felt especially acute. I had created new traditions, Thanksgiving potluck with my grief support group, Christmas Eve dinner with Barbara and her growing brood of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, but there remained a Michael-shaped hole in these gatherings, a space where my son and his children should have been. So when the phone rang 3 weeks before Thanksgiving this year, and I saw Michael's name on the caller ID, my heart lifted with hope. Perhaps this year would be different. Perhaps, finally, we would find our way back to each other across the gulf that had widened between us. I had no way of knowing that this call would not be an invitation, but a rejection. Not a bridge, but a final severing of the ties I had clung to so stubbornly. I had no way of knowing that Diane's cold words, "We think it would be better if you didn't join us this year, Eleanor," would send me spiraling first into despair, then into anger, and finally into a revelation that would change everything. My daily routine had taken on a comfortable rhythm in the years since Harold's passing. Each morning, I woke with the sun, a habit formed over decades that not even widowhood could break. My cat, Fitzgerald, Fitz for short, usually announced the dawn with gentle paws on my face, his internal clock even more reliable than mine. I'd named him after F. Scott Fitzgerald, whose books Harold and I had read aloud to each other during the early years of our marriage. "Good morning, handsome," I'd murmur, scratching behind his ears before swinging my legs over the side of the bed. My first steps were always a bit stiff. Arthritis had taken up residence in my knees and hips, an unwelcome tenant I'd learned to accommodate. The house on Maple Avenue was quiet in the mornings, sunlight filtering through the curtains Harold and I had chosen together decades ago. Though I'd changed many things since his passing, those curtains remained. Their floral pattern faded, but still cheerful. Some connections to the past were too precious to relinquish. My morning routine was simple but deliberate. A hot shower to ease the night's stiffness. Comfortable clothes, usually slacks and a sweater or a casual dress when the weather permitted. A dab of tinted moisturizer, a swipe of lipstick, and a quick brush through my silver hair. Harold had always said he loved watching my hair change over the years, from chestnut brown to salt and pepper, to finally this luminous silver. Like watching the seasons change on my favorite landscape, he'd say, running his fingers through it. Breakfast was always at the small kitchen table by the window, where I could watch birds visiting the feeders Harold had hung years ago. I maintained them faithfully, filling them with different seeds depending on the season. The cardinals were my favorites, their brilliant red plumage like tiny flames against the backdrop of our oak tree. Harold had loved the chickadees, admiring their plucky nature and constant activity. "Just like you, Ellie," he'd say, "small but mighty and always busy." After breakfast came my morning walk, weather permitting, 3 blocks down Maple Avenue, a right turn onto Elm Street, then a loop through Riverside Park before heading home. The same route Harold and I had walked thousands of times together, though now I covered it at a more measured pace. The neighbors along my route had changed over the decades, young families replacing elderly couples, houses being renovated or expanded, but many still greeted me by name. "Morning, Mrs. Martin," Tom Chen would call from his driveway, where he was usually loading his children into the car for school. His parents had been among our first friends when we moved to Maple Avenue, and though they had long since retired to Arizona, Tom had bought the house next door to keep it in the family. "Beautiful day, Eleanor," Mrs. Abernathy would remark from her garden, where she tended roses that rivaled my own. At 82, she moved more slowly than she once had, but her green thumb remained legendary in the neighborhood. These small interactions anchored me to my community, reminded me that I belonged somewhere, even as my immediate family drifted further away. I treasured them more than the neighbors could possibly know. The remainder of my mornings varied depending on the day. Mondays were for errands, grocery shopping at Wilson's Market, where Dan Wilson still remembered how Harold liked his steaks cut, though Harold had been gone for years. Banking at First Community, where I'd worked briefly as a teller before Michael was born. Picking up prescriptions at Patterson's Pharmacy, where Gloria often met me for coffee in their small cafe. Tuesdays belonged to my watercolor class at the community center. I'd discovered a passion for painting that surprised me, having never considered myself particularly artistic. My work wasn't remarkable. Simple landscapes, still lifes of flowers. From my garden, occasional portraits of Fitz in his various lounging positions, but the process brought me peace. The careful observation required to capture light and shadow, the meditative quality of brush-meeting paper, the gentle community of fellow painters who gathered each week to share techniques and encouragement. Raymond, our instructor, had the patience of a saint and the eye of a master. "You're getting better, Eleanor," he'd say, studying my work with genuine interest. "Your colors are becoming more confident." High praise from a man who'd once exhibited in galleries in New York. Wednesdays, I volunteered at Oakwood Elementary, the same school where I'd once taught, though the building had been renovated beyond recognition. I read to first graders, their wide eyes and eager questions reminding me why I'd loved teaching. Children have a way of keeping you present, anchoring you to the moment with their boundless curiosity and spontaneous affection. Mrs. Martin, "Why? Does your hair shine like a star?" 6-year-old Amara had asked recently, patting my head with solemn wonder. "Because I'm magical," I'd whispered, making her giggle with delight. Thursdays were for my ceramics class at the community college, a newer addition to my routine. I'd started just 6 months earlier, encouraged by Barbara, who insisted I needed to get my hands dirty more often. She wasn't wrong. There was something profoundly satisfying about coaxing formless clay into bowls and mugs and small sculptures. My creations were imperfect, often lopsided or sporting unintentional dents. But I loved them anyway. They reminded me that beauty doesn't require perfection. Fridays I met with my grief support group, though grief no longer accurately described our purpose. We'd evolved into something more like a friendship circle, the shared experience of loss creating bonds that transcended our differences. We were 5 women and 2 men, ranging in age from 62 to 81, from different backgrounds and faiths, united by the experience of learning to live alone after decades of partnership. The leftovers, Gloria had dubbed us, her gallows, humor making us laugh despite ourselves. Not quite whole, but still pretty tasty. We met at different homes each week, sharing meals and stories, offering support for challenges and celebrating small victories. When Patricia finally sold the boat her husband had loved, but she had always hated, we toasted with champagne. When Robert navigated his first holiday with his children, but without their mother, we sat with him through his tears. When I mastered a new pottery technique or received a rare call from Michael, they celebrated with me as if it were their own achievement. Weekends were both the easiest and the hardest times. I'd developed routines to fill the hours that once would have been spent with Harold, gardening when weather permitted, reading beside the fireplace when it didn't, occasional movies with Barbara or dinner with friends. I'd joined a Sunday morning walking group that combined exercise with birdwatching, and I'd become surprisingly knowledgeable about local species. But Sunday evenings remained difficult, the emptiness of the house seeming to expand as darkness fell. Those were the times when I felt Harold's absence most keenly, when memories of family dinners and quiet conversations over cups of tea pressed against my heart with almost physical weight. On those evenings, I often wrote letters to my grandchildren, real, letters on stationery, with stamps and everything, describing my week, asking about their activities, sharing stories about their father as a child or nuggets of family history they might someday treasure. I sent these faithfully, though responses were rare. Occasionally, Sophia would send a brief text message with a heart emoji. Lucas had once sent a school project about family heritage, asking questions that I'd answered in painstaking detail, only to receive no acknowledgement that my response had ever reached him. Still, I persisted. These letters were my way of leaving breadcrumbs, a path back to me should they ever wish to follow it. The house on Maple Avenue had changed over the years, as houses do when they age alongside their owners. The kitchen had been updated twice, most recently 5 years ago, when Harold insisted I deserved new appliances after decades of making do. The living room furniture had been replaced when Michael left for college, the formal dining room repainted from deep red to a softer sage, green that better suited our changing tastes. But the bones of the house remained the same: the creaky third step on the staircase, the window seat in the master bedroom where I'd nursed Michael during midnight feedings, the backyard oak tree that had hosted a tire swing, a tree house, and now a simple wooden bench where I often sat with my morning coffee. Every corner held memories. The mark on the doorframe of the pantry where we'd measured Michael's height each birthday. The small dent in the living room wall where Harold had accidentally swung a golf club indoors despite my warnings. The garden stones painted with childish handprints from Michael's elementary school years. Living among these memories was both comforting and painful. Sometimes I considered moving, perhaps to one of those sleek senior communities with activities and dining options and no maintenance worries. Diane had sent me brochures for several, none too subtle hints that she thought the house was too much for me to manage, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. This was home, in the deepest sense of the word, the place where Harold and I had built our life together. The place where, sometimes in the quiet hours of early morning, I could almost feel his presence beside me, hear the echo of his laughter, sense the comfort of his hand on mine. Besides, I managed the house just fine. True, I hired a service for the heavier cleaning twice a month, and Tom Chen's teenage son mowed the lawn in summer and shoveled snow in winter. But I took pride in my independence, in knowing every inch of this place and caring for it properly. My financial situation was stable, if not luxurious. Harold had been meticulous about planning for our future. His life insurance policy, our modest investments, and my teacher's pension provided enough for me to live comfortably if carefully. I could afford small indulgences, art supplies, occasional dinners out, gifts for the grandchildren, while maintaining the house and covering my healthcare needs. Michael occasionally made noises about helping with my finances, but I politely declined. Harold had taught me well, and I'd managed our household budget for decades. The last thing I needed was someone else controlling my resources, however well-intentioned the offer might appear. My social circle had both contracted and expanded, in unexpected ways since Harold's passing. Some couples we'd been friendly with drifted away, perhaps unsure how to include a widow in gatherings designed for pairs. But new connections formed, with Gloria and the others from my grief group, with Raymond and my fellow artists, with volunteers at the elementary school who shared my love of children's literature. I'd even developed an unlikely friendship with Leo, the owner of the local bookstore, a man in his 50s with a dry wit and encyclopedic knowledge of mystery novels. Our discussions of Agatha Christie and Dorothy L. Sayers sometimes stretched into hours, much to the amusement of other customers. "You two should take this show on the road," Gloria had commented after witnessing one of our spirited debates about the relative merits of Hercule Poirot versus Miss Marple. My life had settled into patterns that, while different from what I'd envisioned for my later years, brought their own satisfactions. I missed Harold every day. The sound of his breathing beside me at night, the comfort of his hand on the small of my back, the way he'd absent-mindedly hum while reading the newspaper. But I'd found ways to carry forward without him. And if sometimes I felt a hollow ache when I saw elderly couples walking hand in hand through the park, or when I cooked a meal that had been one of Harold's favorites, or when I watched the grandchildren growing up through the distant lens of social media posts, rather than in the warm circle of family gatherings. Well, that was simply the price of surviving someone deeply loved. The last time I'd seen Michael and his family in person had been Easter, nearly 7 months ago. They'd invited me for brunch at their country club, a lavish affair with ice sculptures and a chocolate fountain, and a man in a terrifying rabbit costume distributing gifts to the children. The grandchildren had been polite but distracted. Sophia, now 13, spent most of the meal checking her phone under the table. Lucas, 11, was more interested in the golf course visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows than in conversation with his grandmother. Diane maintained her perfect hostess demeanor, introducing me to an endless parade of acquaintances whose names I immediately forgot. "This is Michael's mother, Eleanor," she'd say, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "She still lives in the house where Michael grew up, so dedicated to preserving tradition." The way she said tradition made it sound vaguely shameful, like admitting to an outdated superstition. I smiled and shook hands and tried to look like someone worthy of inclusion in their carefully curated world. Michael seemed distracted throughout the meal, checking his watch frequently, stepping away for phone calls that apparently couldn't wait even on a holiday. When he returned from the third such call, I placed my hand gently on his arm. "Is everything all right?" I asked. "You seem worried." He'd given me a tight smile. "Just work, Mom. A big client is wavering on a deal we've been structuring for months. Nothing for you to concern yourself about." "I may not understand the details," I said carefully, "but I understand pressure. Your father dealt with it too. You know, even at the small-town bank you seem so eager to distance yourself from." Something flickered in his eyes. Irritation? Guilt? I couldn't be sure. "That was different," he said finally. "The stakes weren't the same." "The stakes are always high when you care about doing things right," I replied, thinking of Harold's meticulous attention to every loan application, his genuine concern for customers facing financial difficulties. "Your father understood that." Michael's expression softened slightly. "Dad was a good man," he conceded. "But times change, Mom. The world moves faster now." "Some things don't change," I said, but he was already turning away, summoned by Diane, to meet yet another important contact. The brunch ended with polite hugs and vague promises to get together soon. As I drove home alone, I realized how exhausting it was to navigate these carefully choreographed interactions, to mind every word lest it reveal me as hopelessly out of step with their world. In the months since Easter, communication had been sparse. An occasional text message from Michael, usually in response to something I'd sent first. A brief video call on my birthday, during which Diane hovered in the background, subtly hurrying them along. A card from the grandchildren thanking me for the summer care packages I'd sent. Books I thought they might enjoy, preserves from my garden, small pottery pieces I'd made in my class. So when Michael's name appeared on my caller ID 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I felt a surge of hope. Perhaps this would be the invitation I'd been waiting for, a chance to reconnect, to share the holiday that had always meant so much to our family. I answered on the second ring, not wanting to appear too eager. "Hello, dear." "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded tight, formal, not a good sign. "How are you doing?" "I'm well. Just finished planting some bulbs for spring. The garden club recommended a new variety of tulip that's supposed to be quite spectacular." "That's nice." He cleared his throat. "Listen, Mom, Diane wants to talk to you about Thanksgiving. I'll put her on." Before I could respond, there was a shuffling sound, and Diane's crisp voice came through the line. "Eleanor? Hi, it's Diane." "Hello, Diane. How are you?" I kept my tone warm, determined not to let old disappointments color this conversation. "Very busy, as always. The children's schedules are absolutely packed this fall. Sophia made the competitive debate team, and Lucas is doing travel soccer plus advanced math tutoring." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased to hear about their activities. "They're certainly accomplished kids." "Yes, well, we believe in maximizing potential." Her voice took on a brisker tone. "About Thanksgiving, Michael and I have been discussing arrangements." My heart lifted. Finally, the invitation I'd been hoping for. "I'd be happy to bring something. My cranberry relish, perhaps? Or I could make Harold's cornbread stuffing. The children used to love it." There was a pause, a small intake of breath. "Actually, Eleanor, we've been thinking about the holiday arrangements. The thing is, we're hosting some of Michael's colleagues from work, people who could really help his career. We need to make a good impression." "I understand, dear," I said. "Should I wear something special? I have that blue dress from Barbara's daughter's wedding." "Actually," Diane cut in, "we think it would be better if you didn't join us this year, Eleanor. The house will be too crowded, and frankly, your old stories bore everyone." She paused, then added with false brightness, "Maybe you could have a nice quiet day at home? Watch the parade on TV?" The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. For a moment I couldn't speak, couldn't process what I was hearing. Uninvited, unwelcome, an inconvenience to be managed rather than family to be embraced. But was it? Was I really so powerless, so dependent on Michael and Diane's approval for my happiness? Hadn't I built a rich life for myself in the years since Harold's death, filled with meaningful activities and genuine connections? I thought of Gloria and the others in my grief group, who had become more like family than mere friends. I thought of my fellow artists in the watercolor and ceramics classes, who valued my company and my creative efforts. I thought of the children at the elementary school, whose faces brightened when I arrived for reading time. Perhaps being excluded from Michael's Thanksgiving table wasn't the end of something, but an opportunity to create something new. Something authentically mine. The idea came to me suddenly, fully formed, as I stood watching the sunrise paint my garden with golden light. If I couldn't join their Thanksgiving, I would create my own. Not a sad, solitary meal in front of the television, but a true celebration, a gathering of the people who had become my chosen family, who appreciated me not despite my age and history, but because of it. The more I considered it, the more right it felt. My house on Maple Avenue had always been a place of welcome, of comfort, of connection. That didn't need to end just because my son had chosen a different path. I would host Thanksgiving dinner, not as a replacement for what I had lost, but as an affirmation of what I had found. Not in competition with Michael and Diane's elegant affair, but as a genuine expression of gratitude for the unexpected gifts life had brought me, even in the midst of loss. The tension that had gripped me since Diane's call began to ease, replaced by a sense of purpose and, surprisingly, a flicker of excitement. I hadn't hosted a large gathering since before Harold's death. The prospect was both daunting and exhilarating. I would need to plan carefully: the menu, the guest list, the preparations. But first I needed my morning coffee. Life-changing decisions were best contemplated with caffeine, as Harold used to say as I measured coffee grounds into the filter. I felt a lightness I hadn't expected. Whatever came next, whether my impromptu Thanksgiving was a success or a disaster, whether Michael ever recognized what he had cast aside or continued down his separate path, I would face it on my own terms. Not as someone discarded, but as someone choosing a new way forward. That was the gift hidden within Diane's cruel words, the push I needed to stop waiting for permission to matter, to stop making my happiness contingent on others' approval. At 70 years old, it was well past time to fully claim my own life. I carried my coffee to the back porch, settling into the wicker chair that offered the best view of my garden. The late autumn landscape was spare but beautiful. Dried hydrangea, blossoms in deep bronze, ornamental grasses catching the morning light, a few stubborn roses still blooming against the odds. Like me, I thought with a small smile. Still blooming, still reaching for the light, regardless of the season. The phone call from Diane had been like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples through every aspect of my carefully constructed life. For 3 days afterward, I moved through my routine in a fog of hurt and disbelief, going through the motions but feeling strangely disconnected from everything around me. I attended my watercolor class but couldn't focus, the colors bleeding together on the page in ways I hadn't intended. Raymond noticed immediately, pausing beside my easel with a concerned frown. "Everything all right, Eleanor? This doesn't look like your usual work." I forced a smile. "Just experimenting with a looser style today." He didn't believe me. I could tell by the way his eyebrows drew together, but he was kind enough not to press the issue in front of the others. Instead, he squeezed my shoulder gently and moved on to the next student, leaving me to stare at the chaotic mess of pigment that somehow perfectly reflected my inner state. At home, I found myself avoiding certain rooms: the dining room where we'd hosted so many family Thanksgivings, the guest bedroom where I'd already set out fresh towels in anticipation of a visit from the grandchildren. Even my garden, usually my sanctuary, offered little comfort. The chrysanthemums I'd planted with Thanksgiving centerpieces in mind now seemed to mock my naive assumptions about family and belonging. Fitz followed me from room to room, uncharacteristically attentive, as if sensing my distress. Animals have a way of knowing, don't they? A wisdom that doesn't require words. On the third night after the call, I found myself standing in front of my closet, staring at the blue dress I'd mentioned to Diane, the one I'd thought might be appropriate for her elegant Thanksgiving gathering. It was a lovely thing, silk, and chiffon in a shade that matched my eyes, with delicate beading at the neckline. Barbara had insisted I buy it for her daughter's wedding, despite my protests about the expense. "You deserve beautiful things, Ellie," she'd said firmly. "Harold would want you to have them." I ran my fingers over the cool fabric, remembering how it had felt to wear something so fine, to receive compliments and admiring glances, to feel, however briefly, that I still belonged in the world of celebration and connection rather than the margins to which age and widowhood had gradually relegated me. With sudden decision, I took the dress from its hanger and laid it carefully on my bed. Then I began to pull other items from my closet and dresser: my good pearl earrings, the silk scarf Harold had given me for our 35th anniversary, shoes I'd been saving for special occasions that rarely materialized. I spread these treasures across my bedspread creating a kind of inventory of beauty that I'd been holding in reserve, waiting for permission to enjoy. How foolish, how wasteful. Life was too short and too precious to save the best parts for someday. No more waiting, I said aloud, startling Fitz from his position on my pillow. No more making myself small to fit into spaces others designed for me. That night, for the first time since the call, I slept deeply and without interruption. When I woke the next morning, the fog of hurt had lifted, replaced by a clarity and resolve that felt both new and familiar. New in its focus, familiar because it connected me to the woman I had been before grief and exclusion had diminished my sense of agency. Over breakfast, I made my first list. Guests for my Thanksgiving gathering: Gloria from my grief group, Raymond from watercolor class, 3, Maria and Louisa from the community garden, Tom Chen and his family from next door, 5, Leo from the bookstore, 6, Barbara and her husband, Bill, 7, Patricia and Robert from the grief group, Mrs. Abernathy if her arthritis was manageable that day. Perhaps some of the other teachers from the elementary school? Looking at the names, I felt a surge of gratitude. These weren't just acquaintances or activities partners. These were people who saw me clearly, who valued what I offered, who had created space for me in their lives, not out of obligation, but out of genuine connection. The second list was for the menu. If I was reclaiming Thanksgiving, I would reclaim the foods that made the holiday meaningful to me. Turkey, of course, though a smaller one than in years past. Harold's cornbread stuffing, my cranberry orange relish, sweet potato casserole with the pecan topping, green bean almondine. Parker House rolls from my mother's recipe. Barbara's pecan pie, pumpkin cheesecake, a new tradition I'd established post-Harold. Apple cider mulled with cinnamon and cloves as I wrote. Memories surfaced. Michael as a small boy, standing on a chair to help me mix the cornbread batter. Harold carefully turning the turkey to ensure even browning. The grandchildren's faces lit with anticipation as the pies emerged from the oven. The memories brought a pang, but not the paralyzing hurt of before. They were part of me, part of my story, regardless of Michael's choices. I didn't need to erase them to move forward. I just needed to create space for new memories alongside the old. The third list was for practical preparations. Deep clean. The house, especially the dining room. Launder and iron the good tablecloth, Polish grandmother's silver. Bring down the extra folding chairs from the attic. Make sure there are enough plates, glasses, serving dishes, fresh flowers for the table. Perhaps new candles for the centerpiece. With my lists complete, I felt a growing excitement. This wouldn't be a pale imitation of holidays past, or a consolation prize for being excluded from Michael's gathering. This would be something authentic, a true expression of what I valued and who I had become. I called Gloria first, not just because she topped my guest list, but because her no-nonsense support had become my touchstone in difficult moments. Eleanor, I was just thinking about you. How are things? Her voice, slightly raspy from decades of cigarettes before she quit 10 years ago, was as warm and direct as ever. I'm calling with an invitation, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. I'm hosting Thanksgiving dinner this year and would love for you to join me. There was a slight pause before she responded. That sounds lovely. But I thought you usually went to Michael's for the holidays. I hadn't told anyone about Diane's call. Pride, perhaps, or a lingering hope that there had been some misunderstanding that would be corrected with time. But if I was truly embracing this new direction, honesty was essential. Michael and Diane have other plans this year, I said, then added with a courage that surprised me. Actually, Diane specifically uninvited me. Said the house would be too crowded and my stories bore everyone. Gloria's outraged gasp was gratifying. She didn't. That pretentious little... She cut herself off. I'm sorry, Eleanor. That's absolutely awful. It was, I agreed. But it's also helped me realize something important. I've been waiting for permission to belong, when I should have been creating spaces where I already do. So this Thanksgiving will be about chosen family, people who value each other, and you're at the top of my list. Oh, honey, Gloria's voice softened. I would be honored, and I make a damn good Brussels sprouts gratin if I do say so myself. Perfect. Dinner will be at 3, but come whenever you like. You know my door is always open. After Gloria, I called Raymond, who accepted with such genuine pleasure that I felt a twinge of regret for not having invited him to anything social before. Then Maria and Luisa, who offered to bring both wine and their famous empanadas, not me. Traditional Thanksgiving food, but trust us, everyone loves them. Then Leo, who seemed momentarily flustered by the personal invitation before accepting with quiet enthusiasm. Each positive response buoyed my spirits further. By the time I called, Barbara, I was practically floating. A Thanksgiving gathering? At your house? My sister sounded cautiously pleased. What about Michael and the grandkids? They have other plans, I said, deciding to spare her the details for now. But I'd really love for you and Bill to come. It wouldn't be the same without your pecan pie. Barbara knew me too well to accept this simplified version. Ellie, she said gently, what's really going on? You've been talking about seeing the grandchildren for Thanksgiving for months. I sighed, sitting down at my kitchen table. Michael and Diane are hosting some work colleagues. Apparently there's no room for boring old me and my repetitive stories. What? Barbara's indignation was immediate and fierce. They actually said that to you? Those ungrateful, entitled— It's all right, I interrupted, surprised to find that I meant it. I was hurt, of course. Still am, if I'm honest. But it's also shown me that I've been putting too many eggs in that particular basket. There are other people who value my company, who don't find my stories boring. I'd rather spend the holiday with them. Barbara was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. Eleanor Martin, you continually amaze me. Most people would be wallowing in self-pity right now. Oh, I did that for 3 days, I admitted with a small laugh. But then I remembered something Harold used to say when things went sideways. The best response to rejection is creating something better. He was a wise man, Barbara said softly. And you're a remarkable woman. Of course we'll be there. Wild horses couldn't keep us away. By the end of the day, I had confirmations from nearly everyone on my list. Patricia from the grief group couldn't make it. She was visiting her daughter in Seattle, but Robert accepted for himself and offered to bring his famous macaroni and cheese. Not exactly traditional, he acknowledged, but my Vivian always said holidays need something creamy and comforting. Tom Chen and his family were delighted by the invitation. My parents always spoke so highly of your Thanksgiving dinners, he said. They'll be jealous when I tell them we're carrying on the tradition. Mrs. Abernathy accepted with the caveat that she might need assistance getting up and down our front steps. These old knees aren't what they used to be, she said cheerfully, but they'll carry me to good food and better company any day. Even 2 of the teachers from the elementary school, Jasmine, who taught 1st grade, and Marcus, the music teacher, accepted my impromptu invitation with enthusiasm. We usually just get takeout and watch football, Jasmine admitted. A real Thanksgiving dinner sounds magical. I had expected to feel relief at these acceptances, perhaps a quiet satisfaction at having salvaged something from the wreckage of my holiday plans. What I hadn't expected was the genuine joy that bubbled up with each conversation, the sense of purpose that energized me as I began making more detailed preparations. That evening, I pulled out my grandmother's recipe box, a weathered wooden container filled with index cards in her elegant handwriting, supplemented over the years with my mother's recipes and my own additions. I sorted through them, selecting the ones that would form the foundation of our meal. For the first time in years, I found myself adapting and expanding these traditional recipes rather than following them to the letter. Why not add a touch of orange zest to the cranberry relish? Perhaps a hint of rosemary in the Parker House rolls? These small innovations felt significant, markers of my willingness to blend the comfort of tradition with the excitement of new possibilities. I was so absorbed in my planning that I almost missed the text message from Michael. A brief note. Hi, Mom. Diane mentioned she spoke with you about Thanksgiving. Hope you're not too disappointed. We'll try to FaceTime with you after dinner if we're not too busy. The message was so casually dismissive that I actually laughed out loud, a sharp sound that startled Fitz from his perch on the windowsill. An afterthought. A box to be checked off the list of familial obligations. Call Mom so she doesn't feel completely forgotten. As if a 5-minute video chat squeezed between dessert and digestives could compensate for exclusion from the gathering itself. I started several responses, deleting each one. What was there to say, really? That I wasn't disappointed but devastated? That a FaceTime call while they were not too busy was salt in an already painful wound? That I had expected better from the boy I had raised to value family above all else? In the end, I simply wrote, "No need to worry about calling. I'll be hosting my own Thanksgiving dinner and will be quite busy myself. Enjoy your gathering." I hesitated before pressing send, wondering if the message revealed too much of my hurt or would make Michael feel guilty. Then I remembered Diane's words, "Your old stories bore everyone," and hit the button with a sense of grim satisfaction. Let them wonder. Let them worry even about what their casual cruelty had set in motion. The next morning, I woke with a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about salvaging a holiday or proving something to Michael and Diane. This was about reclaiming joy, about creating meaningful connection, about demonstrating to myself and others that my worth wasn't dependent on my son's recognition. Began with practical matters. The dining room table would seat 8 comfortably, but we would be more than that. I would need to set up the card table as an extension, covered with a tablecloth that matched the main table as closely as possible. Harold had built a window seat along one wall of the dining room years ago. With cushions, it could accommodate some of the younger guests. The good china, a wedding gift from Harold's parents, would need careful washing after years of disuse. I had enough matching plates for 10, but would need to supplement with the everyday dishes for additional guests. Maybe mixing patterns would actually look more interesting, more intentional? A celebration of diversity rather than the rigid conformity Diane seemed to value so highly. I spent the morning taking inventory of what I had and what I would need. Serving platters, glassware, silverware, napkins. The process was both practical and deeply symbolic, a way of assessing my resources and acknowledging that they were more than sufficient. I didn't need to apologize for mismatched glasses or plates that weren't from a designer collection. What mattered was that there would be enough for everyone, that no one would go without. In the afternoon, I cleaned the dining room, a task I had been avoiding since Harold's death. We had shared so many meals in this space, some joyous, some tense, all part of the tapestry of our marriage. Without him across from me, the room had felt too large, too empty, a reminder of absence rather than a space for nourishment. But as I dusted the china cabinet and polished the table to a warm glow, I found myself remembering not just Harold, but the many others who had gathered here over the years, my parents during holiday visits, Michael's childhood friends, neighbors who had become like family. The room held all those connections, those threads of community that had sustained us through good times and bad. By the time I finished, the space felt different, not just cleaner but somehow more spacious, more welcoming, a setting ready to embrace new stories alongside the old ones. I stood in the doorway, hands on my hips, and nodded with satisfaction. This would work. This would be good. The next day was my ceramics class at the community college. I had considered skipping it, with so much preparation still to do, but decided against it. This new path I was forging required balance, attention to practical needs, but also to the activities that nourished my spirit. In class, I found myself working with unusual focus and creativity. I had been making small, functional pieces for months: mugs, bowls, simple vases. Today, inspired by my holiday planning, I decided to attempt something more ambitious: a large serving platter for the Thanksgiving turkey. The clay felt cool and responsive under my hands as I worked, gradually taking shape into an oval platter with gently raised edges. Around the border, I carefully pressed leaves I had collected from my garden: maple, oak, dogwood, creating impressions that would remain after the leaves themselves were removed. "This is beautiful work, Eleanor," our instructor commented, stopping to watch my progress. "There's a real sense of joy in it." I looked up, surprised by the observation but recognizing its truth. There was joy in this creation, in the knowledge that it would serve not just an aesthetic purpose, but a communal one. This platter would hold food that nourished both body and spirit, around which people would gather to share stories and laughter. "Thank you," I replied, running my fingers along the leaf impressions. "I'm making it for a special occasion." As the days passed, my preparations expanded beyond the practical into the emotional and spiritual. I found myself reflecting more deeply on the meaning of gratitude, the purpose of gathering, the ways in which food and fellowship could heal wounds and bridge differences. I started a gratitude journal, recording each evening 3 things for which I was thankful. Some were significant: my health, my home, the friends who had become family. Others were small but precious: the perfect bloom of a late rose in my garden, the way sunlight filtered through autumn leaves, the comforting weight of Fitz curled against my side as I read. This practice gradually shifted my focus away from what I had lost: my husband, my expected place at my son's table, toward what remained and what was being created anew. The shift wasn't always easy or linear. There were still moments when grief or hurt would wash over me unexpectedly, when I would find myself reaching for the phone to call Michael before remembering the gulf between us. But increasingly, these moments were balanced by genuine anticipation for the gathering I was creating, by the warmth of connections that were deepening through my holiday preparations. Gloria stopped by with fabric samples for napkins she was sewing as her contribution. "I thought these autumn colors would look nice on your table," she said, spreading out swatches in rich burgundy, deep gold, and forest green. "And everyone gets to take one home afterward. A little memento of our day together," Raymond offered, "to come early on Thanksgiving morning to help with any last-minute setup." "I'm an early riser anyway," he said with characteristic understatement. "Might as well make myself useful." Leo from the bookstore appeared at my door one evening with a stack of books. "Thanksgiving-themed poetry and short stories," he explained, looking slightly embarrassed by his own thoughtfulness. "I thought maybe we could read a few aloud after dinner, if that's not too old-fashioned." "I think it sounds perfectly lovely," I assured him, touched by the gesture. "Harold and I used to read to each other in the evenings. It would be nice to revive that tradition in a new way." Even Mrs. Abernathy contributed, calling to offer the use of her silver candelabra. "They were my mother's," she explained, "and they deserve to be part of a proper celebration rather than gathering dust in my china cabinet. These offerings of time, of skills, of treasured possessions, reinforced what I was coming to understand more deeply with each passing day. That community isn't just about gathering in the same physical space, but about the mutual exchange of gifts, both tangible and intangible. Each person contributing what they uniquely have to offer, creating something greater than any individual could achieve alone." 1 week before Thanksgiving, I received an unexpected text message from Sophia, my granddaughter. "Hi, Grandma. Mom said you're not coming for Thanksgiving this year. Are you sick?" The message caught me off guard. So Diane had presented my absence as my choice, perhaps even my failing. I shouldn't have been surprised, but the manipulation still stung. I considered my response carefully. I had no desire to put Sophia in the middle of adult conflicts or to damage her relationship with her parents. But neither was I willing to perpetuate a falsehood that cast me as the one withdrawing from family connection. Finally, I wrote, "Not sick at all, sweetheart. Your parents are hosting important work colleagues and felt it would be better if I wasn't there this year. But I'm having a lovely Thanksgiving gathering at my house with friends. I miss you and Lucas very much and would love to see you soon." I hesitated before adding a final line. "You and Lucas are always welcome here. Always." I didn't expect a response, and I didn't receive one. But something about sending that message, acknowledging the truth simply and without bitterness, affirming my love and openness to connection, felt like another small step toward wholeness. The silence stretched between us. I wanted to protest, to remind her that these holidays weren't just gatherings, but the threads that held our family's tapestry together. Instead, I heard myself say, "I see. Well, you do what you think is best." "Wonderful," Diane said, sounding relieved. "I knew you'd understand. Oh, and the children will be quite busy with school activities, so maybe hold off on calling them for a bit. They're under so much pressure these days. Not just excluded from the holiday, then, but effectively cut off from my grandchildren as well." The completeness of the rejection was stunning in its casual cruelty. "Is Michael there?" I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "I'd like to speak with him." "He had to step into another call," Diane replied smoothly. "Investment opportunity. That couldn't wait. I'll tell him you understand about Thanksgiving." "Yes, do that," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "Tell him I understand perfectly." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, watching the afternoon, light fade to dusk. The house that had once bustled with life and laughter felt suddenly empty, hollow. Was this what the rest of my days would be? Quiet afternoons blending into silent evenings, waiting for phone calls that never came, gradually being erased from my own family's story. I made myself a cup of tea, mechanically following the ritual, filling the kettle, selecting a bag of Earl Grey, Harold's favorite, warming the pot, waiting for the proper steeping time. The familiar actions anchored me somewhat, though my hands trembled slightly as I poured. Fitz jumped onto the table, something he knew was technically not allowed, but that I often permitted when we were alone. He butted his head against my hand, purring loudly as if sensing my distress. "Well, Fitz," I said, scratching behind his ears, "it seems it's just you and me for Thanksgiving this year." The words spoken aloud made the reality sink in more deeply. Just me, alone on the holiday that had always been about family, about gratitude, about coming together across distances and differences to celebrate our connections. I thought of previous Thanksgivings, the laughter around our dining table, Michael carving the turkey with the same set of knives his father had used, the grandchildren arguing over who got the wishbone, Harold raising a toast to family, the greatest blessing of all. And now, deemed too boring, too inconvenient, too old-fashioned to include in the sleek, impressive gathering my son and his wife were planning. Not family enough for a family holiday. The hurt was profound, cutting to the very core of my identity. Who was I, if not the mother, the grandmother, the keeper of traditions and connections? What was my place in the world if not alongside the people I had loved and nurtured across decades? I must have sat there for hours, my tea growing cold, Fitz eventually abandoning me for his food bowl, the darkness outside deepening until the kitchen window reflected nothing but my own solitary figure at the table. When I finally rose, my body, stiff from sitting too long, I moved through the house like a sleepwalker, touching familiar objects as if to reassure myself of their solidity. The mantel clock Harold had inherited from his father, the quilt my mother had made for our wedding, the wall of family photographs chronicling birthdays, graduations, vacations, moments when we had been truly together, truly connected. I paused, Before the portrait taken on our 40th anniversary, Harold and I standing beneath the oak tree in the backyard, his arm around my waist, both of us smiling with the easy confidence of people who knew their place in each other's hearts. "What would you do, Harold?" I whispered to his image. "How would you handle this?" Of course, there was no answer. Just the ticking of the mantel clock, the distant sound of a car passing on the street, the soft padding of Fitz returning to wind around my ankles. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my living room until dawn, looking at the photographs that chronicled my life. Harold and I on our wedding day, Michael taking his first steps. Family vacations, graduations, celebrations. A lifetime of love and sacrifice and joy. And now, at 70, I was being told I was no longer needed. No longer wanted. As the first light of dawn crept through my curtains, something shifted inside me. A quiet voice that sounded remarkably like Harold's whispered in my heart. "Ellie, you've never been one to give up. Don't start now." I stood at the window, watching the neighborhood slowly come to life. Mr. Lee retrieving his newspaper from the driveway, Mrs. Abernathy's lights coming on in her kitchen, a jogger passing with a golden retriever trotting happily beside her. Life continuing in its ordinary patterns while mine seemed suddenly adrift. 3 days before Thanksgiving, Michael called. I was in the middle of grocery shopping, carefully selecting the ingredients for Harold's cornbread stuffing, when my phone rang. Seeing his name on the screen made my heart race in a way that felt uncomfortably familiar. The anticipation, the hope, the fear of disappointment that had characterized our relationship for too many years. I answered with deliberate casualness. "Hello, Michael. This is a surprise." "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded strained. I wanted to check in about Thanksgiving. Sophia mentioned texting with you." Of course. He wasn't calling out of genuine concern, but because his daughter had revealed the discrepancy in narratives. I continued, selecting tomatoes, testing each for ripeness as we spoke. "Yes," she asked if I was sick. Apparently that's the explanation Diane gave for my absence. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. When he spoke again, Michael's voice had a defensive edge. It seemed simpler than trying to explain the whole situation. The situation being that I was uninvited because I'm boring and inconvenient. Another silence, this one more uncomfortable. "Mom, it wasn't like that. Diane just thought—" "I know exactly what Diane thought," I interrupted, surprising myself with my firmness. "And I know that you allowed it, but that's not why I answered. Your call. If you're worried about what Sophia thinks, you can tell her the truth or continue with your convenient fiction. That's your choice. But don't expect me to lie to her if she asks me directly." This is exactly why. He stopped himself, took an audible breath. "Look, the point is, if you really want to join us, we can make it work." Diane says she might have been too hasty. The invitation, if it could even be called that, was so grudging, so clearly motivated by damage control rather than genuine desire for my presence, that I almost laughed. 6 months ago, I might have accepted it eagerly, grateful for any crumb of inclusion. Now, it felt like an insult. "Thank you, but I've made other plans," I said, my voice steady. "I'm hosting my own Thanksgiving dinner with friends who actually enjoy my company and my stories. I wouldn't dream of canceling on them." "You're hosting?" He sounded genuinely surprised. "At the house? By yourself?" The implication that I was incapable of organizing a gathering without assistance might have hurt once. Now it just confirmed how little he understood about my life, how completely he had bought into the narrative of the helpless, diminished mother in need of management. "Yes, Michael, at my house, which I have maintained perfectly well since your father died, in case you hadn't noticed during your brief visits, with friends who have become like family to me. It's going to be lovely." "I see." His voice had turned cool, professional. the tone he probably used when a business negotiation wasn't going his way. "Well, I hope you enjoy your alternative celebration." "I will," I assured him. "And Michael, if you and Diane and the children would like to stop, by for dessert around 7, you'd be welcome. Everyone else will still be there, but we could make room." It was an olive branch, offered not from desperation, but from a position of newfound strength. I didn't expect him to accept, and I wouldn't be devastated if he declined. But it felt important to leave the door open, to demonstrate that my reclaiming of the holiday wasn't about retaliation, but about creating something authentic and inclusive. "I'll mention it to Diane," he said after a pause, "but we'll probably be tied up with our guests until quite late." "Of course. The invitation stands regardless." I moved toward the checkout, ready to end the conversation. "I should go now. I have quite a lot of preparation to do." After we hung up, I stood in the grocery store parking lot for a moment, keys in hand, taking stock of the interaction and my response to it. There was still a tightness in my chest, an echo of old hurt. But alongside it was something new, a quiet pride in having spoken my truth without anger or self-pity, in having maintained boundaries without burning bridges. I drove home with my groceries and a growing sense that whatever happened on Thanksgiving Day, whether Michael and his family appeared or not, whether every dish turned out perfectly or some ended up overcooked or underseasoned, I had already achieved something significant. I had refused to be erased. I had claimed my right to create meaning and connection on my own terms. The house was quiet when I returned, but not empty. Fitz greeted me at the door with his usual imperious meow, demanding dinner as if I had been gone for days rather than hours. As I put away the groceries and fed my impatient companion, I found myself looking around my kitchen with fresh eyes. This room had been the heart of our family home for decades. Here, Michael had done homework at the table while I prepared dinner. Here, Harold and I had shared quiet conversations over late-night cups of tea. Here, I had taught my grandchildren to roll out pie crust during their increasingly rare visits. But it wasn't just a repository of memories. It was a living space, still humming with possibility. The cookbooks lining the shelf included recent additions alongside my mother's well-worn collection. The refrigerator held ingredients for both traditional favorites and new recipes I was eager to try. The calendar on the wall was filled with activities and connections that had nothing to do with my identity as Michael's mother or Harold's widow. I ran my hand along the counter, feeling a surge of gratitude for this house that had sheltered so much of my life, for my own resilience in finding ways to fill it with meaning even after devastating losses. Thanksgiving was still 2 days away, but already I felt its true spirit stirring in my heart. Not the commercial version focused on abundance and picture-perfect family gatherings, but the deeper current of recognizing blessings amidst life's complexity, of finding reasons for gratitude even in seasons of challenge. That evening, as I finalized my preparations and checked my lists one more time, the phone rang again. I answered without checking the caller ID, expecting perhaps another question from one of my guests about what to bring. "Grandma?" The voice was hesitant, a bit lower than I remembered. "It's Lucas, my grandson." My heart squeezed with a complicated mixture of joy and caution. "Lucas, how wonderful to hear your voice. How are you, sweetheart?" "I'm okay." There was a pause, filled with the particular awkwardness of preteen boys trying to express feelings. I heard you're not coming for Thanksgiving." "That's right," I said gently. "But I'm having my own gathering here." "Yeah," Sophia told me. Another pause. "Dad said you invited us to come for dessert." "I did. You'd all be very welcome. Mom says we can't because we'll have important guests." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "But I don't even know those people, and they probably won't let me have any of the pumpkin cheesecake." I smiled at the dramatic injustice in his tone, so characteristic of his age. Well, if you can't come on Thursday, perhaps you could stop by on Friday? I'll save a piece of cheesecake especially for you. Really? The hope in his voice made my throat tighten. Dad has to work, but maybe Mom would drive me over. Or I could ride my bike. I'm allowed to go 3 miles now by myself. That would be lovely, I said, carefully keeping my tone light despite the emotion welling up. But check with your parents first, okay? I don't want you getting into any trouble. Okay. I could almost hear him rolling his eyes. Grandma? Yes, dear? I miss your stories. The words came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding them back. They're not boring. I remember lots of them, like the one about Dad getting stuck, in the tree and the fire department having to come, and the one about when you and Grandpa went camping and the raccoons stole all your food. Tears pricked at my eyes. I remember those too, and I have plenty more whenever you want to hear them. Cool. A muffled sound in the background, someone calling his name. I gotta go. Dinner's ready, but maybe I'll see you Friday? I hope so, sweetheart. I love you. Love you too, Grandma. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, letting the tears fall freely. Not tears of sadness or self-pity, but of a deep, complicated gratitude for this unexpected connection, for the reminder that bonds of love could persist through distance and misunderstanding, for the affirmation that my stories, my life, my experiences, had value, at least to this one precious boy. It wasn't everything. It didn't erase the hurt of Diane's words or Michael's acquiescence. It didn't guarantee any particular outcome for our fragmented family relationships. But it was something real and true, a light in the darkness, a reason to keep the door open even while establishing necessary boundaries. I wiped my eyes, took a deep breath, and returned to my preparations with renewed purpose. Whatever else this Thanksgiving might bring, it had already offered a glimpse of what really mattered. Not perfect gatherings or unbroken traditions, but authentic connection, genuine appreciation, the courage to speak truth with love. And for that, I was truly thankful. Thanksgiving morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through my bedroom window. I'd been awake since dawn, my mind already mapping out the day ahead. For the first time in years, I felt a genuine excitement about the holiday, rather than the anxious anticipation that had become my norm when preparing to navigate Michael and Diane's carefully orchestrated gatherings. As I made my morning coffee, I glanced at the dining room. The table was already set with my grandmother's china and silver, supplemented by everyday plates where needed. Gloria's handmade autumn napkins added warmth to the formal setting. The centerpiece of chrysanthemums, oak leaves, and bittersweet berries that Raymond and I had arranged yesterday afternoon looked even better in morning light. "This is really happening," I said to Fitz as he wound around my ankles, demanding breakfast. "And it's going to be wonderful." I had expected to feel nervous. After all, hosting a gathering of mostly new friends rather than family was unfamiliar territory. But instead, I felt calm and purposeful. Each task on my list seemed less like an obligation and more like an act of creation, of building something meaningful from the ashes of rejection. Barbara arrived at 8 with fresh-baked rolls and an unexpected gift, a beautiful corsage of autumn flowers. "For the hostess," she said, pinning it to my sweater. "Mother always wore one for special occasions, remember?" The small gesture brought unexpected tears to my eyes. It wasn't just the beauty of the flowers, but the recognition they represented, an acknowledgement of my role as creator of this gathering, not just an invited guest or tolerated addition. "Perfect," I whispered, touching the soft petals. Raymond appeared next, rolling up his sleeves to help with whatever was needed. "Just point me where you want me," he said, unexpectedly adept at kitchen tasks for a bachelor. My late wife believed strongly that everyone who eats should know how to cook, he explained with a small smile. Marion would approve of this gathering, Eleanor. She always said Thanksgiving should be about genuine gratitude, not obligatory appearances. By noon, the kitchen hummed with activity as dishes came together, the turkey golden and fragrant, stuffing studded with cranberries and pecans, sweet potatoes topped with a maple pecan crust. The house filled with the familiar sense of Thanksgiving, but my spirit felt lighter than it had in years. Each arriving guest brought not just their promised dish, but some additional contribution. Flowers from Tom Chen's garden, homemade bread from Mrs. Abernathy, artisanal cheeses from Leo. Each offering was presented not from obligation, but as a gift, an expression of genuine pleasure in being included. What struck me most was the absence of tension that had increasingly characterized family gatherings in recent years. There were no undercurrents of judgment, no carefully maintained facades. These people had no shared history of disappointments or unmet expectations. They were simply individuals who had chosen to spend their holiday together, bringing their authentic selves to the celebration. As 3 o'clock approached, we gathered around the table. I found myself standing at the head, suddenly overcome with emotion at the sight of these dear faces turned toward me with expectation and warmth. In past years, Harold had always offered the Thanksgiving blessing, and after his death, Michael had reluctantly taken on the role. Now, the moment was mine to shape. "Friends," I began, my voice steadier than expected, "I want to thank each of you for being here today. This gathering is different from any Thanksgiving I've hosted before, but perhaps closer to the true spirit of the holiday than many that preceded it." I paused, looking at the varied faces around my table. Young and old, different backgrounds and beliefs, each with their own story of loss and resilience, each having chosen to be present in this moment. Today, we come together not because of obligation or shared DNA, but because of something perhaps more meaningful, the conscious choice to create community, to share abundance, to recognize in each other the qualities worthy of gratitude. Gloria reached over to squeeze my hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Raymond nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful and affirming. So as we share this meal, I invite each of you to carry that awareness, that you are valued and valuable, that your presence here matters, that this table is richer because you have brought yourselves to it, exactly as you are. I raised my glass, filled with sparkling cider. To chosen family, to new traditions, to the courage to begin again at any age. To chosen family, they echoed, glasses raised in a mosaic of crystal, ceramic, glass. A perfect metaphor for our varied but harmonious gathering. The meal that followed was everything I had hoped for and more. The food was delicious, of course, the turkey moist and golden, the traditional sides mingling happily with newer additions like Maria and Luisa's empanadas and Marcus's Jamaican sweet potato pudding. But it was the conversation that truly nourished us, flowing easily from serious discussions of books and art to hilarious anecdotes from everyone's past holiday disasters. I found myself laughing more than I had in years, sharing stories I might once have censored for fear of boring my audience, listening with genuine interest to perspectives very different from my own. There was a freedom in this gathering that had been missing from family holidays for too long, the freedom to be fully present, fully authentic, without fear of judgment or rejection. As we finished the dessert course, Barbara's pecan pie, my pumpkin cheesecake, and Tom Chen's homemade ice cream, the doorbell rang. The conversation paused as everyone looked toward the entryway. "Are you expecting anyone else?" Barbara asked, eyebrows raised. I shook my head, already rising. Not specifically, but the invitation was open. My heart beat faster as I walked to the door, trying not to form expectations about who might be standing on the other side. It could be a neighbor stopping by with holiday wishes, or perhaps one of the guests' family members coming to join us for dessert. When I opened the door, the last light of the autumn day illuminated 3 figures on my front porch. Lucas, his eyes wide with uncertainty, but his smile genuine. Sophia, looking uncomfortable but determined. And Michael, standing slightly behind his children with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Hi, Grandma," Lucas said, stepping forward. "We came for cheesecake? If that's still okay?" For a moment, I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat. Then I opened my arms, and Lucas stepped into them without hesitation, his gangly preteen frame still fitting against me in the way that had comforted us both since he was small. "It's more than okay," I assured him, reaching out to include Sophia in the embrace. She came more hesitantly, but didn't pull away, allowing herself to be gathered close for a brief moment before stepping back with the self-consciousness of early adolescence. "Michael," I said, meeting my son's eyes over the children's heads. "This is a surprise." He shifted uncomfortably, hands in the pockets of his expensive coat. "The kids really wanted to come. They've been talking about your cheesecake all day." A brief pause, then a concession that clearly cost him something. "And I wanted to see how your gathering turned out." I could have pointed out that this was more than wanting to see how things turned out. It was, in fact, showing up uninvited at a dinner to which he and his wife had explicitly disinvited me. I could have made him squirm a bit more, could have savored the uncomfortable reversal of our positions. But looking at my son's face, the face I had loved since the moment the doctor placed him in my arms, I saw beyond the awkwardness and pride to something more vulnerable. He was here, after all. Despite whatever it had cost him to break away from Diane's carefully orchestrated dinner, despite the implicit admission that he might have made a mistake, he had brought his children to my door. It wasn't everything. It wasn't a full reconciliation, or a guarantee that our relationship would magically heal. But it was something, a step, an opening, a possibility. "Come in," I said, stepping back to make room for them to enter. "We're just finishing dessert. There's plenty to share." I led them into the dining room where the conversation had resumed in my absence. It paused again as my unexpected guests appeared, curious eyes taking in the newcomers. "Everyone, this is my son Michael and my grandchildren, Sophia and Lucas. They've come for dessert." I kept my tone light, matter of fact, as if late arrivals were entirely expected and welcome. "Michael, kids, these are my friends." What followed could have been awkward. In many ways, it was. Michael standing stiffly beside the table as I found. Additional chairs, the children's wide eyes taking in these strangers occupying what had once been a family-only space. My guests recalibrating their understanding of the situation with this new information. But awkwardness gave way to something else, as Lucas spotted the dessert plates and exclaimed with genuine enthusiasm, "Is that really your cheesecake, Grandma? The one with the ginger snap crust?" "It is indeed," I confirmed, cutting generous slices for my grandchildren. "And Barbara brought her pecan pie, the one your dad used to beg for when he was about your age." Michael's posture relaxed slightly at this reminder of his own childhood connection to these traditions. He accepted the plate I offered with a nod that contained the barest hint of a smile. "You used to hide the first piece for me," he remembered, his voice softer than it had been in years when speaking to me. "Under a napkin in the refrigerator so I could have it for breakfast the next day." The small memory shared in this setting created a bridge between past and present, between the family relationships that had frayed and this new tapestry of connections being woven in my dining room. Conversation resumed, now including my grandchildren, who gradually lost their initial shyness as Gloria asked Sophia about her debate team experiences and Tom's teenage son discovered a shared interest in astronomy with Lucas. Michael remained quiet, observing rather than participating, but I noticed him listening intently to the stories being shared, perhaps seeing me through new eyes as others responded to aspects of my personality and history he had long since stopped noticing. As the evening progressed, the gathering naturally began to shift and disperse. Some guests moved to the living room with coffee, forming smaller conversation groups. Others helped clear the table and organize leftovers in the kitchen, the work becoming its own form of fellowship. The children gravitated toward the back porch, where Tom's son was showing Lucas a constellation-finding app on his phone. I found Michael in a quiet corner of the dining room, studying the photographs on my sideboard, family images spanning decades, including several of him at various ages. "You have a nice group of friends," he said without turning around, his voice carefully neutral. "They seem to really care about you." "They do," I agreed, standing beside him to look at the photographs. "Just as I care about them. That's how friendship works at its best." He was quiet for a moment, his finger tracing the frame of a photo showing him at about 10, proudly holding up a fish he'd caught on a trip with Harold. "I remember this day. Dad was so patient, showing me how to bait the hook again and again, even though I kept messing it up." "He loved teaching you things," I said softly. "He was so proud of you, Michael. Not just of your accomplishments, but of your character, your kindness, your loyalty." Michael's hand dropped from the photograph, his expression tightening. "I haven't been very kind or loyal to you lately, have I?" The question hung between us, honest in a way our conversations hadn't been for years. I could have brushed it aside with easy reassurance or wielded it as a weapon to deepen his guilt. Instead, I chose simple truth. "No," I said gently. "You haven't. And that has hurt more deeply than I can express. But I haven't given up on you, Michael. On us. I've just needed to stop making my happiness dependent on your approval or inclusion." He turned to face me fully then, his eyes, so like Harold's, filled with a complex mixture of emotions. "I don't know how we got here, Mom. When did everything get so complicated?" "Life does that," I said, thinking of all the turning points, the small choices in major events that had gradually shaped our current reality. But complications can be navigated with enough honesty and goodwill. We can find our way to something better, even if it's different from what came before. From the living room came the sound of laughter, Gloria's distinctive rasp, Raymond's deeper chuckle, the higher notes of the younger guests. From the porch, the excited voices of the children discovering something in the night sky. The house was alive with connection, with the easy flow of people enjoying each other's company without pretense or performance. Michael listened to these sounds, his expression softening. "Your friends seem to appreciate your stories. Diane was wrong about that." "People appreciate authenticity," I said, choosing my words carefully. "When we share our experiences not to impress or dominate but to connect, to find common ground, to offer insight or humor, that's never boring to those with ears to hear." He nodded slowly, perhaps letting this perspective take root alongside the narratives that had been shaping his understanding of me, of family, of what constituted a worthwhile life. "Lucas has been missing you," he admitted. "More than he let on, I think. He keeps bringing up things you taught him, stories you told him. Even Sophia, though she'd never say it directly. I've missed them too," I said simply. "And you, Michael, the distance between us has been one of the great sorrows of my later years." He didn't have an immediate response to that, but he didn't turn away either. We stood together in that quiet corner, surrounded by the evidence of our shared history, listening to the sounds of the present moment unfolding around us. Finally, he said, "I should get the kids home. Diane will be wondering where we are." I nodded, understanding the complexities he was navigating, the competing loyalties and expectations. "Of course. But Michael?" He paused, looking at me questioningly. "This doesn't have to be a one-time visit. My door is always open to you and the children. Not just on holidays, not just when it's convenient. Always." Something in his face shifted, perhaps a recognition, of the unconditional nature of that welcome, so different from the calculated social maneuvers that characterized his current world. "I know, Mom," he said softly. "I've always known that, even when I couldn't acknowledge it. It wasn't a promise of regular visits or repaired relationships. It wasn't an apology for past hurts or a guarantee against future ones. But it was an honest moment between us, a small clearing in the tangled underbrush of our complicated history, a place from which something new might grow, given time and care." We rejoined the others, Michael gathering his children with gentle reminders about school the next day, the children saying goodbye to their new acquaintances with unexpected reluctance. At the door, Lucas hugged me fiercely, whispering, "Best Thanksgiving ever, Grandma. Can I really come back tomorrow?" "Absolutely," I assured him, smoothing his hair with a grandmother's automatic gesture. "I'll save some of everything for you." Sophia's hug was briefer but genuine, accompanied by a quietly sincere, "Thanks for the cheesecake, Grandma. It was way better than the catered desserts at home." Michael's farewell was more reserved, a slight embrace, a murmured thanks for including them. But as they walked down the front path to where their car waited at the curb, he turned back for a moment, raising his hand in a gesture that felt like more than just a casual wave goodbye. I watched until their taillights disappeared around the corner, then returned to my remaining guests with a heart both full and peaceful. The evening continued for another hour, the conversation growing quieter and more reflective as candles burned low and the satisfaction of good food and better company settled over everyone. When the last guest had departed with leftovers carefully packaged and plans for future gatherings already taking shape, I returned to my dining room to survey the aftermath of our celebration. The table had been cleared, dishes washed and put away by helpful hands. What remained were the small, pleasant signs of a gathering well enjoyed. The centerpiece with its candles burned down to stubs, a forgotten napkin under a chair, the lingering aromas of coffee and spice. I sat at the head of the table, where I had offered that opening toast so many hours ago, and let the quiet of the house settle around me. Fitz appeared as if summoned by the stillness, jumping onto my lap with his customary assumption of welcome. "Well, old friend," I murmured, stroking his soft fur. "What did you make of our Thanksgiving?" As I sat there in the peaceful aftermath, I found myself reflecting not just on the events of the day, but on the journey that had brought me to this moment. From the initial hurt of Diane's rejection to the purposeful creation of an alternative celebration, from the gradual recognition of my own capacity for joy, independent of family approval, to the unexpected arrival of Michael and the children. Each step had required some combination of courage, resilience, and openness to new possibilities. The gathering hadn't been perfect. There had been moments of awkwardness, missed conversational cues, the inevitable small mishaps of any human endeavor. But measured against what truly mattered, the genuine connections formed and deepened, the laughter shared, the stories exchanged, the mutual recognition of each person's inherent worth. These imperfections faded to insignificance. And what of Michael? His appearance had been both surprising and deeply meaningful, a small crack in the wall of distance between us. I had no illusions that one evening would heal all the accumulated hurts and misunderstandings, would magically transform him back into the emotionally available son of my memories, or make Diane suddenly value my place in their family. But sometimes, the most important journeys begin with the smallest steps. His willing presence at my table, his honest acknowledgement of the distance between us, his bringing the children to my door despite whatever opposition he might have faced at home, these were not nothing. They were, perhaps, the tentative beginnings of a new chapter in our relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation, on chosen connection rather than expected roles. As for me, I had discovered something profound about myself through this experience, that at 70 years old, I was still capable of growth, of creativity, of forging new connections and finding new sources of joy. That the end of one chapter, my role as the central figure in Michael's family holidays didn't mean the end of my story. That I could be the author of my own experience, defining meaning and value for myself, rather than accepting others' limiting narratives. This Thanksgiving had become not just a meal or a gathering, but a declaration of sorts, a statement that I was still fully alive, still capable of creating beauty and connection, still worthy of respect and inclusion. Not because of my relationship to anyone else, not because of past accomplishments or future utility, but simply because of who I was, in myself, in this present moment. Outside my dining room window, the night was clear and cold, stars visible, above the silhouettes of bare tree branches. Inside, the warmth of the day's connections lingered, a different kind of light. I had set out to create a gathering that would salvage something from the wreckage of rejection. What I had found instead was something far more valuable. Not a salvage operation, but a new creation. Not a substitute, but an authentic expression of gratitude and community that stood entirely on its own merits. Lucas would return tomorrow, eager for leftovers and stories. My new friends had already made plans to meet again, Gloria and Raymond for a museum exhibit next week, Maria and Luisa inviting several of us to their winter solstice celebration. Life would continue its complex unfolding, bringing new challenges and joys, expected and unexpected. But whatever came next, I would face it with the knowledge that I was not defined by others' perceptions or limitations. That I could create meaning and connection even from difficulty. That there were many forms of family, many ways to belong, many sources of joy available to those willing to recognize and embrace them. My daughter-in-law had told me I couldn't attend their holiday dinner, her words carrying the clear message that I was unwelcome, inconvenient, less than valuable. But in that painful rejection, I had found an unexpected gift, the push I needed to reclaim my own agency, to create something authentic and meaningful on my own terms. And in the end, everyone else had chosen to attend. My friends with their enthusiastic acceptance and genuine appreciation, Michael and the children with their unexpected appearance, even Fitz with his companionable presence now, as the day drew to its peaceful close. Not because I had manipulated or guilted them, not because of obligation or tradition or lack of alternatives, but because what I had created was worth choosing, worth celebrating, worth being part of. Because I was worth choosing, worth celebrating, worth being part of, exactly as I was, at 70 years old, with all my stories and experiences and continuing capacity for growth. That, more than any perfectly roasted turkey or flawlessly executed gathering, was the true gift of this Thanksgiving, a recognition that would nourish me long after the leftovers were gone, sustaining me through whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. In the quiet darkness of my bedroom that night, I whispered, a final thanks to Harold, whose wisdom and love had helped shape me into the woman capable of this day's creation. Then I settled into sleep, at peace with my past, anchored in my present, and open to whatever the future might bring. My sons. Wife told me I couldn't attend their holiday dinner, but in that moment of exclusion had been the seed of something far more meaningful than mere inclusion. A reminder that at any age, in any circumstance, we retain the power to create meaning, to forge connection, to choose joy. For that unexpected gift, I was truly, deeply grateful. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your key screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.